So welcome everybody. We are going to do our first home seller workshop tonight here live on Facebook and via webinar. If you would like to participate in the polling questions, you will need to go and actually register for the webinar, which you can do on our website, jordanbennettonline.com/home-seller-workshop. And we're gonna have a couple questions here to make it a little bit engaging. Bear with us as this is our first webinar. So we are going to have just a couple of housekeeping items. We want to interact. We want this to be a little bit engaging and get a little bit of context for what other people are thinking and what questions people have. So a couple ways you can interact. One is we're going to have some polling questions. If you could respond to those, we're going to leave those open for about 15, 20 seconds, and then we're going to close them out. We're going to have also a chat. So you can go ahead and ask questions in the chat. We're going to probably answer all those at the end. Candidly, I've got my presentation up in front of me, so I can't see all of your beautiful, I guess just names because we don't see faces on a webinar. But my goal today really is to demystify the home selling process, to provide some clear takeaways for becoming a confident and profitable home seller. Or if you're just curious about the process and you think, hey, one day I might sell and I want to better understand this, I hope to better equip you so that your home, when you go to market, looks less like this and more like this. And you look less like this and more like this. We're also, Courtney's going to go ahead and post in the chat window our Calendly link where you can book either a 15-minute phone call or a 30-minute Zoom meeting. You will have direct access to my calendar. My wife doesn't even have those kind of privileges. So you can book an appointment with me if you want to chat about anything in more detail. If you have any specific questions that you want to take, offline, I'd love just to be a resource to you in that way. You can also sign up for our newsletter if you don't receive our housing updates that we send out every 2 to 3 weeks to keep folks updated with what's happening in the market. Please do go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and we can definitely keep you in the loop on all things real estate related. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to share kind of a brief story, look a little bit at the market as a whole. Then we're going to talk about how to maximize the home sale, navigating some transaction milestones, look at some good, bad, and ugly. And then we'll just share with you a little bit about some of the things that we do to kind of make the process easier. So why follow the model? Why listen to anything that I have to say? I'm just another real estate broker. We've been doing this for 11 years. We've helped buyers, sellers, investors, purchase and sell over 300 million in real estate sales in this last 11 years. And we have a really good understanding of how to really prep your home for the least effort and money to create really the greatest return on investment and the most money in your pocket. So I want to share with kind of a quick story. We're not really talking about flipping homes here, but what we're talking about is really prepping a home to get the most possible for it. Had this client from Arizona that was obviously living out of state, had a tenant move out of her property, and it was just left in disrepair. So what we did is actually helped her really facilitate bringing that home to market. Took the keys, brought it all the way to closing, and some of the things we managed, we actually went in there and did a bunch of upgrades. And the reason we did that was because we did a cost benefit analysis to determine, if it made sense to sell as is or to do some work on the property prior to going to market. I wish I had some before photos because it was really rough. But what we did here is we went in and actually did, we painted cabinets, we coordinated painting of the interior. We actually even went in and did some countertops, changed out an appliance, flooring, baseboards, some hauling, landscape cleanup, and then ultimately some staging. And what would have been probably about a $495 sale turned into a $540 sale. So for an outlay of less than $20,000, we were able to net that seller an extra $45,000. So pretty big difference, almost an extra $30,000 in her pocket, which effectively is literally just money in her pocket. So big difference. And listed that home for $525. It sold for $540, and again would have left almost $50,000 on the table. So pretty big deal. Really briefly about myself, if you don't already know me, I've been selling real estate for 11 years. Public accounting background, so I'm a little bit more analytical than most. And as I mentioned, we've sold a lot of homes, so I really have kind of a sense of what is the way to maximize that process for you. So we're going to launch a quick poll, which is how much experience do you have with real estate? And you should see that question pop up on your screen. There it is. We'll give that about 15 seconds. All right, so we've got a number of homeowners here, and a little bit of those that have bought and sold several times. So we've got some veterans here as well. So great. So getting back into it here, we're going to talk a little bit about the market, what's happening out there. Who here has taken economics? Oh, you know what? You can't raise your hands because I can't see your faces. But if you've taken economics 101, you know that really markets are driven by supply and demand. So we're going to look at that a little bit. This is our active listing inventory right now. So we're starting to see inventory increase, which we would expect to happen in the spring. We were obviously a little bit delayed with the crisis that we've been facing. And so we're normally with a lot more inventory. In fact, you can see where we were last year at the same time, over almost 7,500 homes on the market today, just shy of 5,000 homes on the market. This is across all of Orange County. So what's the takeaway from this? A lot less inventory today. In fact, less inventory than all of the previous 3 years, which we expect because people are hitting the pause button. In fact, almost 1,000 homeowners came off the market in April as a result of COVID, and we're sitting on the sidelines. So we would expect inventory to start picking up now, and my suspicion is that where we would normally be seeing a pretty steep curve with a lot more homes being added to the market in the early to mid-spring, I'm suspecting that's going to end up happening in the late spring, early summer. So kind of look a little bit like a different curve than normal this year. And then demand. This isn't too much of a shocker, right? This is COVID. This is what happened here. Demand, which is the last 30 days of sales, typically would increase, right, through the spring and then start to slow as we get into summer, midsummer, and then throughout the rest of the year. So we saw demand fall off a cliff. It went down about 60% just about from over about a 2 to 3 week period. And now we are seeing it, I apologize, actually, it almost was cut in half. We're just starting to come back. We're up about 38% over the last 2 weeks. So we're seeing now more home buyers out there looking at homes. The fear has subsided a little bit as we get into summer. We're starting to return to what I would call the new normal. How has that impacted days on market? So average days on market, that's the number of days it takes from going on the multiple listing service to being in escrow. So this is a really important number because what it tells us is what kind of market are we in. And you can see down here the little cheat sheet. Essentially, if you're over 120 days, it takes 4 months or more to sell a home. We actually call that a slight buyer's market. If it takes about 3 to 4 months, we call that a balanced market. And if it takes less than 3 months, we call that a seller's market. So we can see that COVID was causing that average days on market to start climbing. In fact, we barely just crept into buyer's market territory. All those buyers were on the sidelines, real excited. Market's going to fall. Then what happened? Demand started picking back up again. And it just seems like our Orange County real estate market is like a freight train that can't be stopped, COVID or not. So we've seen days on market start to drop again, coming actually back, passing a balanced market, going back toward a slight seller's market again, if you can believe that. Buyers are frustrated because it's been, probably 7 years now of being a seller's market. So how does that relate to, to selling your home and really to maximizing the value that you're going to be able to get? We're going to look at 3 things: timing, pricing, and prep. Okay, so we're going to launch another poll question here. What is the best time of the year to sell a home? And that poll is going to jump up here. Is it the spring, the summer, the fall, or the winter? And we're going to see if you prove me right or wrong here. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. Okay, so we were kind of equally divided here between spring and summer. So nobody's way off here, which is good to see. And the answer is the spring. Generally speaking, in a normal market, March, April, May, June are the best months to sell, and we're going to see why here in just a sec. Well, actually, first is a trick question, right? It's always a good time to sell a home in Orange County. However, if you are trying to optimize, where I start this conversation is we work backwards, right? We look at when do people want to be moving? Well, when do kids go back to school? What happens in August? Schools start opening up. Well, this is pre-COVID, right? In a regular world, kids are going back to school, mid to late August, early September. People are going on summer vacations. So people want to be settled, oftentimes by early to mid-July. So if we count backwards and we figure your average escrow is about 30 to 45 days, that puts you going into escrow right around May 15th to June 15th, right? So assuming it takes 30 to 60 days to sell a home, we work backwards from there. If you're looking at May to June, then you're looking at going into escrow sometime between March and May, April, May, right? Which means you're prepping and listing in that early spring period. In fact, the best clients are those that come to me in January and say, Jordan, we're thinking about coming on the market. We want to sell this year. We're targeting like an April 1 or a March 15th live date. And we start to prep even earlier. So you can really get those ducks in a row and then there's no rush, right? And of course, this again just reiterates that listing inventory. We typically start to see it climbing, kind of peaks in the summer. So when you're getting on the market in the spring before a lot of other sellers, you're beating the rush, right? And there's going to be less competition. Now, do you think there's a bad time to sell? Well, if you live in Chicago, Alaska, there's definitely a bad time to sell. I've actually heard of some markets almost entirely shutting down, from about November to February, March. Big freeze in demand. And then it starts to thaw in the spring. Not here. I mean, the reality is you can really sell a home year round. But again, if you have perfect control, ideal environment, you really want to be coming on the market in that early to mid spring. And again, with COVID, my expectation is that what we would expect to be a really busy second quarter is going to translate to potentially a slightly busier third quarter. But again, that's a guess. Time will tell. And we talked a little bit about these market climates and what the days on market actually means for what kind of market it is. And what does that determine? Well, what kind of market it is determines negotiations and who has more leverage. If it's a seller's market, you're going to anticipate multiple offers and you're really going to write the terms as a seller. As a buyer's market, there's a lot of sellers and not as many buyers. And so as a buyer, you have more control over the terms, right? A seller is just excited to get an offer, let alone multiple, right? And then in a balanced market, of course, is somewhere in between. So right now, we're kind of right on the cusp of that balanced market in a very slight seller's market. So what does this mean? It's not like it was 3-4 years ago when 30-40% of listings were getting multiple offers. It's more like, if a home is really dialed in and it's special and it's priced correctly, you may get multiple offers, but it's not like it was, previously in the past really strong seller's market. But we are still in a slight seller's market. So we talked a little bit about timing. Let's talk about pricing. So question for you here, easy true or false, so you can have a 50-50 chance of getting this one right. Does listing price affect buyer visibility? In other words, does the price at which you list your home have a direct impact on how many people are going to see it? And let's see what the consensus is on this one. There's no C, so don't choose C. Okay, so the majority of people, 83% of people said that yes, listing price affects buyer visibility. And it does. It absolutely does. And in fact, we'll get into some of the details as to why that is a little bit later in the presentation. So for one, the biggest thing is the price at which you are is going to impact the exposure to the market. Okay, in other words, if you are significantly above market, you're going to get dramatically less exposure, less buyers looking at it. Of course, everybody wants a deal, right? Every buyer starts with, here's my criteria. Can I meet my criteria and get what I want at this price? And if the answer is no, then what do? They go back to the drawing board and they do one of two things: either adjust the expectations or raise the price. Of course, it's Orange County. Most people will raise the price, so we don't like adjusting expectations. But that all being said, there's always more buyers looking at those lower price points. The higher you go, it's part of the reason that luxury, when we hit some bumps like we did with COVID, luxury was a little bit more impacted than those lower price points. So it's really important to consider, how do you maximize that exposure, of course, without leaving money on the table. So the next question, really along the same lines, is does listing price affect days on the market? So days on the market, again, going back to what I had said earlier, that's the number of days from going live on the multiple listing service to negotiating an offer and opening up escrow. So let's see what the consensus is on that. Okay, so 100% on that one. Everyone agrees that listing price does affect your days on market, of course, right? And this is why we do see different pricing strategies, and we'll talk a little bit about those strategies. Ultimately, there's price it low, auction style, and bid it up. Price it high and negotiate down, or price it at market, right? Those are pretty much your options when it comes to pricing. Now, here's the funny thing about market time. What people think happens, right? What do most sellers think? Most sellers think that the market's going to catch up to my price, right? I'm going to price it. I'm going to price it here, up high, and eventually someone's going to buy it if I wait long enough. Now, the funny thing is that most of the time, the opposite is true. In just about every market, except a very, very, very fast, hot, appreciating market, that kind of market, sometimes you can price ahead of the market and the market will eventually catch you. In other words, you're not pricing for today's market. You're rolling the dice and you're making a bet that the market is going to be better, say in 60, 90, 120, 150 days, and you're actually pricing yourself for that market, right? But if you're wrong and it's a depreciating market, what are you going to do? You're actually going to chase the market down. Now, we haven't been in a chase the market down kind of market for a long time, right? So people are pretty ambitious, not really a lot of fear that that's going to happen. So that's part of the reason that people do tend to price a little bit ahead of the market. Now, in an appreciating market, you can price a little bit ahead, 2 or 3%. If your neighbor's house sold for 800 and yours is a little nicer in some ways, you maybe could afford to go to 8.25. But if you go 850 or 900, it's likely that you're going to sit and you're going to end up chasing the market versus the market coming up to where the market expects you to be. And on that same note, this is a really, really interesting chart. What this shows you is the impact of reducing your price on your final selling price. And what it shows you is that if you price it correctly and you didn't ever have to do a price reduction, you're going to sell at about 98. This is, of course, averages, right? You're going to sell at about 98.2% of your asking. Well, let's look at the next alternative. You had to adjust it 1 to 4% off asking, right? So let's say you adjusted your $500,000 house to 480, right? Look at the impact it has on where you sell. And this is what's really interesting. Of course, if you're adjusting it, pretty intuitive, you're selling at a lower percentage of your original list price. But look at this. You're actually also selling at a lower percentage of your last price. In other words, even after adjusting, you are selling at a lower percentage of that last asking price. And get this, if you adjust 5% or more, in other words, you're pretty far off the money, you're selling at about 86.5% of your original list price, 96% of your final list price. And then also look at those average days on market, how long it took, right? So pretty big impact. The point is that you have this golden opportunity. You've got this window when a listing is hot and new, and you really want to strike when the iron's hot and find that buyer in that first 30 to 45 days, sometimes sooner. So we're going to do another poll here. True or false? Does days on market affect buyer appeal? Let me word that a different way. Buyers that are looking at your home, are they paying attention to the number of days that your home has been on the market? We're going to go ahead and launch that polling question. Oops, wrong question. Sorry, we'll cancel that one out and relaunch. Oh no, that's correct. I'm sorry. Okay. We're 100% on that too. I'm not fooling anybody tonight. That's too bad. So days on market does affect buyer appeal. Buyers pay very close attention to how long the property's been on the market, right? If it's been on the market for 2 days, it's going to have a different impact on that buyer's mind space than if a property's been on the market for, say, 5 months, right? So what does a high DOM, days on market, what does it mean? Well, it says three things here, and that's because number four is really the umbrella over it all. Number one, something is wrong with it, is what buyers are thinking. Why hasn't it sold? We can tell you from representing buyers, buyers are asking us, they're asking their agents, why hasn't it sold yet? What's wrong with it, right? And it's usually one of these three, it's A, B, or C, right? Under the umbrella that something's wrong with it. It's either priced too high, it's in poor condition, which really is still number one, right? Because the price doesn't match the condition, or the seller's unmotivated. They're not really serious, right? They're just kind of testing the market. And are those sellers out there? They absolutely are. People that don't need to move. They're not taking a job relocation to Texas and have to sell. They're more just saying, hey, if I could get this price, it would be nice, right? That's not really a real seller because they're not necessarily in tune with the reality of the market. It's more of just kind of like rolling the dice right at the craps table. So we talked about timing and pricing. We're going to talk a little bit about prep. Okay. So this is a fun one. Can I sell my home as is the polling question. Can I sell it as it sits and not do anything? So the answers are yes, I don't have to do a thing. Yes, but I would need to fix major systems like mold, roof leaks, structural damage. Or no, I don't have to fix anything. I'm sorry. Or no, I can't sell it as is. I have to fix everything that comes up in an inspection. Okay, interesting. So we had about a third of folks say you can sell as is, you don't have to do anything. And we had about 2/3 say, yes, you can sell as is, but you need to fix major systems, roof leaks, structural damage, etc. So I'm really excited that I fooled a couple of you. Um, you don't have to do a thing. Believe it or not, your home could be sliding down a cliff. It could be sinking into the sea, and you could sell it as is. Now, why is that? Well, there's nothing requiring a seller to do anything. You can, just as you can sell raw land, you could sell a partially completed home. We've seen that. We've seen investors that couldn't finish the project and sold a home halfway through construction. You can literally sell anything in any condition. However, it's unlikely to get to the finish line if there's major things either that you're hiding or that most buyers would anticipate being fixed prior to closing. But there is not any requirement. So one of the things we look at when we meet with someone considering selling is we look at a couple different things, right? We do, of course, the comparative market analysis, try to determine what the home's worth. We do what's called a cost benefit analysis. That's where we're going to help you determine, is there anything that should be tweaked, right, before you actually bring it to market to make that best impression. And then, of course, getting to the repairs and the prep, right? What does that actually look like? So the CMA, the comparative market analysis, this is pretty intuitive. We look at comparables. We get an idea of what else is selling in the neighborhood to give you an idea of what the home would be worth, in the current condition. A couple other things we consider: absorption rate. That means how many months of inventory are there on the market? How many homes are there? How quick are homes selling? We look at what we call price bracketing, and that's where we understand that buyers are looking in certain brackets. So this comes down to strategy and making sure we pick the right bracket where buyers are looking. And then we look at market dynamics. Is the market going up? Is it going down? If it's going up really fast, like we talked about, we can price ahead of the market a little bit. If it's going down really quick, you better blow it out so you're not chasing the market down and ending at a lower price 6 months from now than you would have landed today. And if it's flat, you better just pay really close attention to that last market sale and make sure that you're adjusting for the correct things and finding that price that is really a reflection of where the market's at today. That cost benefit analysis, we're looking at things that are going to have an impact on the home value, where if you spend $1, you're getting more than $1 back, right? Who wants to make an improvement where you spend $1 and get 80 cents back? That would be foolish, right? But if you can spend $1 and get $1.30 back, for some people that's going to make sense, and that's where you got to figure out your threshold. Some people say, I don't want to spend X number of dollars to make 10% better return on the money. I'd rather just be done with it. But if you told that same person, hey, we can get you 30% more, could be a big difference, right? So those are the things that we look at. So we got another poll question here. If you were a buyer, which of these home upgrades would have the biggest influence on your purchase? So if you were a buyer, which home upgrades would have the biggest influence on your purchase? New flooring, new countertops, new landscaping, new roof, or solar addition? This one's a little trickier. Give it a few more seconds here. Oh wow, so it was pretty evenly split. Nobody said a new roof, so it didn't fool anybody there. Solar, landscaping, countertops, and flooring. So this is a bit of a mixed bag. So I'm not going to comment on this yet. I'm going to leave you in suspense here for just a moment. Yeah, it was pretty evenly split. So nobody said roof, but we were pretty much split a quarter between countertops, landscape, solar, and flooring. So we'll come back to that. And here we are. Fixes that add value at a relatively low cost. Yes, paint, flooring, countertops, landscaping. A friend of mine, an agent, it was a good friend of mine, he said it best. He said this to me once. He says, buyers buy color and they buy texture. In other words, they buy what they can feel and see and touch. Is it pretty? If it's pretty, someone's going to buy it, right? That's what buyers want to know is, can I see myself in it? Does it make an impression? I've had buyers tell me, we're just going to know, when it's the right home, we're just going to know, right? It's that feeling it creates, right? It's a home. It's more than just a financial investment. It really is about creating a feeling. So we got to consider that it's the stuff you can see, feel, and touch. So going back to those questions, flooring, paint, landscape, really all of the above. Unfortunately, the things that don't add value and are the most expensive are your major structural things. Your roof, new air conditioning unit, new furnace, new electrical panel, repipe. Okay, I'll caveat a repipe. If you're in an area where there's lots of pinhole leaks, which is a lot of South Orange County, this can have a little bit more value add compared to some of the other structural upgrades. And then solar. Now, why is that? Why is that these big expensive things don't have a big impact on the sales value of a home? I'll tell you why. We are a microwave society. We are very short-sighted as a people, and we consider kind of the here and now. We don't think 10 years out. Most people don't think 10 years out. So in other words, if you have a roof that's got a brand new roof with a 40-year life, or you have a roof that's got maybe 7 years left, same deal. Buyer's not going to pay more or much more for the brand new roof, even if you spent $30,000 on it. They care about, is it going to get me through the next 5 to 7 years, is kind of how people think. So that's really important. If you're thinking about doing a major structural upgrade, ask yourself the question, am I going to be here for 7 or more years? If you're going to be there for 2 or 3 or 4 years, you may want to just do the best you can to service it, keep it alive, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm happy to address that in more detail if you guys have additional questions at the end. So kind of along the lines of prep, we're talking about upgrades, things to consider doing prior to bringing a home to market. Another piece is staging and considering whether or not to stage the home versus leaving it empty or kind of working with what you have. And I can tell you that staging can have a huge impact. In fact, if you're looking at a vacant home or a staged home or home with furniture in it, it's night and day. And I'll tell you why. There's really 2 big reasons. One, it's difficult for a buyer to picture themselves inside of an empty home without the rooms kind of laid out for them and the furniture placed in such a way that they can picture themselves in it. And the second thing is, guess what happens in a vacant house? You see everything. You see every speck of dust, every little ding in the wall, paint scuff. So not that you're hiding things with staging, but what happens is when a house is staged and it has stuff in it, the buyer is seeing the forest rather than the trees, right? So what if you don't have the cash to pay for updates before selling, right? This is a common issue, right? Somebody says, I have to sell, I'm moving, we got to get rid of this house. Well, I don't have the $5,000, the $10,000 to do X, Y, Z. There are some options. One thing that we do specifically for clients is in certain situations where it's merited, assuming a client qualifies, is we'll actually front the rehab cost to help prepare that home to a certain limit, and they get reimbursed at closing. So we will actually, in order to help our sellers put more money in their pocket, we will actually manage and finance that process for them. It's a little bit unique, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So the next piece we're going to look at as we move along here is navigating the transaction milestones for the smoothest closing. So in other words, what to expect. How does it work? What does the process look like for selling a home? What's going to happen? Well, the first thing is going to be the listing prep. And this is kind of the stuff that we're talking about a little bit, right? We talked about the pre-listing prep. We talked about the cost-benefit analysis. Another thing that oftentimes we recommend, not in every case, but in some cases, is actually doing a pre-inspection. We want to go in on the front end and figure out what is a home inspector going to find on the back end once you're in escrow that could either blow the deal up or put you at a disadvantage in negotiating, or maybe something that could have been resolved much more easily and quickly and cheaply on the front end ends up turning into a big negotiating piece for the buyer to actually ask for a lot more than they should be able to, because you feel like your back's up against the wall in order to close the deal. And then, of course, the professional photography. So your pre-inspection, we're looking for things like this, like a load-bearing refrigerator, minor settling, which we do tend to see here in South Orange County with the expansive clay soils. Hopefully nothing to this extent. And then we do that cost-benefit analysis like we talked about to really determine what's worth doing versus what's not worth doing. We talked about the staging. And of course, the funny thing about staging, right, is that I've had people tell me this, well, why would I do staging? It's not like the buyer's buying my bed or my clothes or my lamp, but what's the difference, right? Same thing, it's the same exact house here, right, in this picture, but which one creates a better impression? Which one you walk through and, wow, I can picture myself here. Such a simple thing that has such a profound impact. In fact, I've walked through homes where the sink's full of dishes. I've actually walked through homes where like the dogs pooped in the house and no one's cleaned it up. Amazing the impact that that's going to have on you as a buyer, right? So these are things you want to consider when you're preparing your home and that staging. The home staging industry says that staged homes sell up to 30 times faster than unstaged properties and up to 20% more. Now, of course, that's from the home staging industry, so that may be a little bit biased. But let's go to the National Association of Realtors. 97% of buyer's agents said staging affects the buyer's view of the home. 58% of seller's agents said staging increases the dollar value of the home. That's from NAR. And then again, the Real Estate Staging Association says that they sell in 90% less time. I would absolutely agree that they do sell for more and they do sell for quicker. They sell quicker. Why is this? I like to call it the HGTV effect. Everybody thinks they're Joanna Gaines, and it's got to be perfect, right? And if it's not perfect, what we find is that what a buyer thinks something is going to cost is always much greater than what it actually costs. So we want to make sure we do as much for a buyer as possible to really get the most money for that house. In fact, I've had sellers tell me, you know what, I like the seafoam green carpets. We're just going to give the buyer a $3,000 credit. Well, guess what? Not only is that $3,000 credit not going to mean anything to the buyer, because they're just going to walk through that house and say, it's ugly, right? So this is why it is worth considering doing these things. Has a big impact really on being able to get the most possible. So, your pictures, and of course, getting to the professional photography and video has a huge impact. That's what buyers are looking for. It's what drives buyers to go look at properties. Does it make a great first impression versus, the DIY approach? Sometimes you even see the people in the pictures in the mirror, which is real fun. The next step, of course, is you're going to go live on the market. we kind of toyed with the idea on this webinar of talking about some of the, the marketing and the things that we do to really get the word on a property out there. But we didn't really want this to turn into, a kind of a whole sales pitch. So we're going to kind of skip that part and really just walk you through the transaction milestones. So getting onto the escrow process. So you've got a buyer, you've negotiated a deal, you're opening up escrow. A lot of sellers feel like they've crossed the finish line. Time to break out the champagne and start drinking. It's not the case. When you open escrow, I always tell my clients that's a great first step. It's something to be excited about. But when we're going to break out the champagne is when that buyer removes all of their contingencies. So let's talk briefly about what happens in a transaction. You've got it in escrow, right? Buyer says, I want to buy this home. You've negotiated price and terms. Now they're going to do their tire kicking. They're going to go through and make sure that they still want to buy it, based on not just the first impression, but what's under the sheets, right? So first off, they're going to do their home inspection. Again, they're going to go through with a fine-tooth comb and find every little thing wrong with the property, right? Home inspector's not going to tell them how pretty it is or what a great view it has. They're going to tell you everything that's wrong with it. Next thing you're going to do is the bank is going to order an appraisal. So what I like to say is that you got to sell a home twice. First, you got to sell it to the buyer. Then you got to sell it to the buyer's lender. So the appraisal is a piece that you've got to consider. Then there's the disclosures. Anything you know about the home. Has there been mold? Has there been water intrusion? Have you had to repipe? Have there been any slab leaks? Has the home been used as a meth lab? Any of those answers, if they're a yes, you've got to explain it to the buyer. Failure to do that can lead to a lawsuit 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, from now if something is not disclosed. I do not believe there's any statute of limitations on fraud. In other words, if you don't disclose something you should have disclosed, it can bite you a long time later. And then an HOA doc review. So if you live in a homeowners association, you got to share with that buyer everything that's going on in the association. They're going to review the board minutes. They're going to see everything that's happening in there, good, bad, or ugly. Then you're going to negotiate. So believe it or not, the negotiations aren't done when you accept a contract. In fact, you're going back to the drawing board to negotiate things like repairs. If there's any issues with the appraisal, there might be additional questions about the disclosures. Once you get through all that, the buyer is eventually going to get their full loan approval. And once they've kicked the tires, they've done their homework, and they say, yes, we still want to move forward and buy this home, then they are going to remove all of their contingencies. Once they do that, that's when they're locking in their deposit, and they can't walk away and just take their money back. At that point, if they cancel after doing all their due diligence and saying, yes, I'm in, and then they cancel, that's typically when you see a buyer walking away from their deposit. So we talked a little bit about the inspection, the appraisal process, the disclosures, the HOA doc review, the negotiations, the full loan approval, and of course that contingency removal. And when you get that contingency removal is when you celebrate. That's when you know with 99.9% certainty, because anything can happen, right? As we ask an attorney and they'll tell you anything can happen. Most of the time you're breaking up the champagne and celebrating, and that's going all the way to the finish line. And then finally closing. So what happens next? We've got that contingency removal. We know the buyer's moving forward, but guess what? It's maybe day 17. They've removed their contingencies. Closing's not for another 13 days. So what happens during that time? Why does it take so long? A transaction's really front loaded. It's really heavy, a lot of due diligence on the front end. And on the back end, it feels like as a seller and even sometimes as a buyer that you're just playing a waiting game. In fact, a lot of stuff's happening in the background. What's happening is the lender is going through their process to get that loan to the point where it's actually ready to fund. So what happens, we won't go super deep on this because I'm not advertising my lending services here. We're just kind of giving you a high level overview. But what you're going to have is the lender is going to give what's called the clear to close. They're going to send out what's called the closing disclosure, also known as the CD. Once the lender sends out that CD, it starts a 72-hour clock for the buyer to be able to sign their loan documents 3 days after they sign that closing disclosure. And then after they do that, they're going to wire their final closing funds. The funder at the lender is going to sign off the final lending conditions, and then that loan is going to fund. Orange County is a little bit unique because you can actually fund and record. Record basically means they're transferring the title to the new owner. That in Orange County can happen in the same day. We call it special recording. In some counties and other states, you can't special record. So you actually have to fund the one day. Let's say you fund on a Monday, you record on Tuesday, and that home becomes yours on Tuesday, even though you're really paying interest from your loan starting Monday. And then the money's in the bank. So as a seller, if it closes on a Tuesday and records, you'll see money in the bank the next day, Wednesday, midday. So what are the good, the bad, and the ugly? What can happen in a transaction? Well, the ugly is trying to sell it on your own, selling it with an inexperienced agent, risk it not selling at all, or running into legal trouble. We've seen, I believe the stat is that over 80% of real estate related lawsuits are against unrepresented sellers. Guess what? If you're trying to sell on your own, you don't have errors and omission insurance. You don't have experience with contracts, disclosures, making sure everything happens as it's supposed to happen. And it can really bite you. In fact, the National Association of Realtors says that unrepresented sellers sell for between 8 and 10% less than the market. That's a national statistic. What's the bad? The bad would be not completing your prep work, not doing your homework, listing it at an incorrect price, not thinking about pricing strategy, having it sit on the market for a long time, lowering your price multiple times, losing buyer confidence, and ultimately leaving money on the table. There's a lot of things that happen with a home sale. None of them are brain surgery or rocket science. And yet, if a few of them are done incorrectly, it can have a huge impact on your ultimate result. So what's the good? Price it correctly, sell it the first time, sell it quickly for top dollar with a professional that's going to get it done right. And then just a quick look at some of our exclusive services. We talked about, the prep, and I think the ability to help folks get their home ready for sale, really even managing that process, financing it, and just handling it, because I think the reality is a lot of people get overwhelmed by this part. I know I have to sell my house. I've got crap everywhere. I know I have to do X, Y, and Z. This is leaking. I have to fix this. And what does the confused mind always say? It says no, right? If there's no clear path, there's no clarity, people get freaked out and they just get disheartened and don't take action. So this is why we really want to make this process as easy as possible. And we provide a lot of tools just to make that as easy as possible, so that, we've even, believe it or not, had sellers. I've had sellers that I've never met before out of state mail me a key and say, handle it, call me when it's done. And we are able to do that and to provide that concierge level of service. So in any event, love to answer any specific questions. We're going to answer a couple questions now in the chat, do a little Q&A. If there's anything specific or more personal or really specific that you think was not answered and you don't want to ask in the chat, don't feel comfortable, please do feel free to click the Calendly link in the chat and book a time with me. And would love to answer any additional questions you have, and love to provide more clarity here. So let's go to the Q&A and see if we have any questions in the chat.
Jordan, you were so good. I think people don't have any questions.
What impact does upgrading a bathroom have to sales? That's a great question. So one of the things that I really like to convey to a home seller is that I think there's really three things that have the biggest impact on a successful sale. Those three things are your curb appeal, your kitchen, and your master bath. Why is that? I think it's because mama normally makes the decisions. A lot of times it's the wife that really makes that final decision. Is this the home? Does it give me the warm fuzzy feeling? And that's not to be sexist. I think the reality is that everybody appreciates a really workable kitchen, a master bathroom. It's where you're spending so much of your time. And that curb appeal. What is the impression that home makes from the street? That's where, changing out a garage door, doing some landscape cleanup can have a minimal cost in relation to how much impact it can have. And the same thing in kitchen. I mean, I'll tell you what a lot of investors do. They go in, they paint cabinets, they change out countertops, they put in some nice looking but inexpensive appliances. And then on a bathroom, I would say that the most inexpensive bathroom piece that you can do is changing out your vanity, top, sink, faucet, mirror, light fixture, even possibly the floor tile. The most expensive piece in a bathroom, of course, is the actual shower enclosure. If you have, say, a stand-up shower and you have to rip out the whole thing and you have to do a hot mop and do the floor to ceiling tile and put in the frameless glass. All that stuff can be really expensive. So typically on a bathroom, we encourage folks to consider like the vanity mirrors light piece first and the shower last. Another question we have here, how much does home staging cost? That's somewhat of a loaded question because it really depends if you're doing one room, if you're just doing like artwork and things on the counters, towels, bath mats, or if you're going out and bringing in full furniture, right? You're going to be staging a dining room, a living room, a master bedroom, a patio. So it can really depend. It is something often that we will include, in our listing fee. Other times we have sellers opt to do that themselves. So that's a little bit of a mixed bag. And has the quarantine affected the market? When do you think it might get back to normal? I would say that definitely we saw a big impact on the market. April was really hard and coming into about mid-May. But right now it feels like we're going back to normal. It's hard to know if everything will trickle through the economy and if we'll feel something in housing 3 to 9 months from now. If you were to ask me just today, I think we're stable, and I do anticipate us staying stable. And how do you coordinate a purchase contingent first on the sale of a property? That's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges that people have in Orange County is that very, very few of us are in a position to buy 2 homes at the same time, right? Most people need the funding from the first house. In other words, you sell the home, you take the equity, and that's the seed money or the down payment for the next property. So how do you buy the next house if you haven't sold the previous house? Well, there's a couple routes you can go, right? One is sell the first house, go rent, and then go buy. I would say that's the least desirable. Who wants to move twice? It's a pain in the butt. It's expensive. It's not fun. So I don't recommend that. Most people don't opt for that. The other option at the other end of the spectrum is something most people can't do, which is buy the home you want, start moving your stuff in there, and then sell the home you own. Again, that's a small fragment of people that can afford to do that. So the middle alternative, which I would say 80 to 90% of our clients do, is they sell their current home. First, they go out and we go out on a tour and make sure that there is some stuff out there that would fit the bill for an up-leg purchase. Then we put the home on the market, get your home in escrow, and then we negotiate with the buyer a 30 to 90-day rent back. In other words, you've sold your home, money's in the bank, it's not your home anymore, but you're now renting your own home back. So you're living in that home, but as a renter. So now you've got the cash in the bank, you're not contingent, and you can go buy a home, and you've bought yourself, say, 1 to 3 months to give that a little bit of buffer and not have your back against the wall where you're thinking, I got to be out of my house in 3 weeks. I'm going to go buy the first thing I see. So I would say that option I just mentioned is what most people decide to do. It's a great question. Any other questions? How long can you keep the money on an escrow that you got from selling your home until you buy the new home? That is a great question. It's a question that I get very frequently, surprisingly, but it's actually based on a misconception. It's based on the idea that if you sell your house, you have to pay tax on the gain. And guess what? If it's been your primary residence for 2 of the last 5 years and you're living in that home, you have the capital gains exemption, which means if you're single, and this, talk to your tax professional. I'm not practicing tax, but if you're single, you can exclude up to $250,000 of gain. And if you're married, you can exclude up to $500,000 in gain. Let me give you an example. You bought a home for $400,000 15 years ago. Today, you're selling it for $900,000 net. After you paid all the fees, escrow, title, etc., you're actually netting $900,000, $500,000 more than what you paid for that house. That money, if you are married, is tax-free, period. You do not need to replace that with another home unless it's an investment property. If you're not living in that home and that home is actually an investment where you have a renter in there paying you rent each month, and you sell that investment property, same situation, bought it for 400, netting 900, that whole $500,000 is taxable unless you do what's called a 1031 exchange, which is a whole nother webinar. But there is absolutely a way to defer the tax on an investment property sale, but if it's a primary, it's unnecessary. Great question. Should I take backup offers on my home? That's another great question. So absolutely. It's always good in all areas of life to have a plan B, C, D, right? If plan A doesn't work out. So absolutely. We typically will continue to market a property until we're not allowed to market it anymore, so that we can solicit backup offers. Some great questions, everybody. Any other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for being with us this evening. Hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully it had some kind of relevance to your own situation. If not, you will be highly educated in the home selling process in case you ever do need to sell, or you can sound really smart to your friends. So please do click on the Calendly link. Love to meet with you for a Zoom meeting or a phone call. And do sign up for our newsletter on our website if you're not already receiving it. And please do ping me. Would love to connect if I can be a resource to you in any way. And I wish everybody a great evening. And if you were on the webinar, please do fill out the survey, if you would, the Google Doc form there in the chat. So with that, I will bid you adieu. And if you can click on the link here before we wrap things up. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us. Good night.